Take a network break. I'm Drew Conry Murray.
I'm Jonna Johnson.
Help yourself to a virtual donut as we try to set a new land speed record for the fastest tech news podcast. Today's show, we're going to talk about new Cisco Wi-Fi 7 APs and a new licensing approach, Google Cloud moving to enforce multi-factor authentication, Aviatrix rolling out a PaaS offering, Cisco's Q1 financial results, and more. We have a Tech Bites after the news today. We're talking with sponsor Minio about how AI is altering the data infrastructure landscape and why organizations are looking to build AI infrastructure on-prem. We'll also dig into Minio's recently launched AI Store. This is a software-only distributed object store that offers simplicity, scalability, and performance for AI infrastructure and other high-performance storage use cases. And just a reminder, the Packet Push Network has even more podcast goodness, including N is for Networking, Network Automation Nerds, and Jonna, your other show, Heavy Strategy.
Yes, thank you for the promo there.
Absolutely. Spread the wealth. So this is a self follow-up or a self-FU, I guess, Jonna, because last week we had talked about a new firewall from SonicWall, the TZ80. And I think the most interesting about it was that they were offering a warranty, potentially up to $200,000 worth of a warranty if there's a security breach and financial loss. I mentioned having reached out to SonicWall to get more details about how that warranty might be claimed. Here's what I got. First, customers need to purchase a qualified firewall, that is the TZ80, and be registered in a My SonicWall account after November 1st, 2024. Qualified firewalls must be configured according to the SonicWall configuration guide and run current software and meet specified requirements. And I didn't get any more details on what those specified requirements are. The warranty offers compensation for covered losses that lead to business interruption from three types of events. 1, non-volumetric DDoS attacks. 2, unauthorized remote access. And 3, software exploitation. So, John, I feel like we got a little bit more detail, but not everything.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what a DDoS attack is if it's non-volumetric. And unauthorized remote access of like what now? The firewall or devices behind the firewall?
Yes.
And similarly, software exploitation of the firewall or devices behind the firewall. My gut says that SonicWall has actually thought this through and probably has meaningful answers to those questions, but it's a little frustrating that they didn't specify them.
Yeah, I think so. I was just working with, a PR person who probably went to them and said, I need some details. And they just, gave us the top line stuff. SonicWall is working with a third party called Cysurance. And I'm sure Cysurance has, a lot of detail on this because, it's in the insurance company's interest to not necessarily have to pay out. So again, I think we mentioned this in our last conversation. There's going to be a lot of fine print and you want to dig into those details. Like even the first one, non-volumetric DDoS attacks, I did some reading on that. And yes, there are different types of DDoS attacks that could be qualified as non-volumetric, but who's deciding? Do you get to decide? Does SonicWall get to decide? Is some third party involved? So a lot of questions.
Since you did the digging, what is a non-volumetric DDoS attack? Because that seems to be like non-wet water in my mind.
Yeah, so I guess they would call it sort of a resource exhaustion attack, like a SYN flood. And I'm not sure.
Okay.
So it's trying to use, open as many SYN connections as you can, and the device essentially topples over, as opposed to just jamming as much traffic into the pipe as you can.
Now, that actually makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that distinction. I'm glad you dug into it.
I did. But again, who's deciding that, right?
Right.
So, yeah, if you're planning on, interested in signing up with SonicWall and being in line for this warranty, again, a lot of fine print. Make sure you check the details. I appreciate SonicWall for sharing what they would with us, and I'm sure there are reasons why they don't want to share more. But this is going to have it's going to result in some conversations if you're deciding to engage this way. All right, let's get into the news. First, Cisco has announced 2 new access points that support Wi-Fi 7. This is the CW9178 and the CW9176 APs. They'll start shipping in December 2024. And you may be aware Wi-Fi 7 offers new features to improve performance and throughput, including things like multi-link operation or MLO, which lets devices connect on 2 bands simultaneously. Other upgrades include wider channels that you can stuff more data into for each transmission. The big news here is that Cisco is putting the Wi-Fi 7 line under a single brand called Cisco Wireless now. It's also changing the licensing so that Wi-Fi 7 APs can be managed via the cloud or via an on-prem controller, and customers can switch between both operating models without needing to change out the hardware APs or the switch licenses. John, did you have thoughts on this?
Well, I think it's actually interesting, both the branding and the licensing model. Essentially, what you're getting is unified support for both your Cisco Wi-Fi devices and your Meraki, whether managed from the cloud or from on-premise or both. And the new access points incorporate a blend of Cisco and Meraki management and security features that previously required, quote, significant integration work from the customer or a third party, end quote. So I think Cisco is doing the right thing here, doing the integration, sort of post-acquisition, although it's very post-acquisition in this case.
Yeah.
But, they're giving you the best of both worlds management. They're giving you an upgrade in terms of Wi-Fi 7, and that MLO is actually quite interesting. Certainly something to dig into, and the fact that you can manage. You've got the best of both worlds when it comes to management and security. Net, assuming it all plays out as advertised, is actually pretty compelling.
Yeah, obviously, for any vendor to be running multiple product lines, that's just multiple costs for them. So I'm curious to see if this starts to apply for. I mean, I assume they're going to do this going forward. I don't know what it means for previous generations of these products. Right now, this multi-license capability, do it on-prem, do it with a controller or in the cloud, only applies to the new Wi-Fi 7 APs.
Yes.
Something else to be aware of is that Cisco's bundling its Cisco Spaces capabilities into its new Wi-Fi 7 APs. If you're not familiar with that, Cisco Spaces essentially is providing like location-based services, so you can do things like inventory tracking or providing wayfinding to guests or do environmental monitoring, connecting to IoT and sensors and stuff.
Just a question on that, Drew.
Yeah.
Does that also play into E911?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Yeah, I would have to look that up. I don't know.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this, it would be definitely something to check to see how that affects your E911 capabilities. But
Yeah.
yeah.
My
Net,
assumption is
it's
it
good
does
stuff.
not, because E911 is probably a separate thing, although it does involve location data.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I will say with this bundle, they're sort of taking a page from Broadcom in that what they're saying is we're providing you a simplified license. There's two options with this license, essentially option A and option B. But both of them include Cisco Spaces, and whether you intend to use it or not, you're going to be paying for Cisco Spaces. So on the one hand, they are simplifying the licensing. On the other hand, the trade-off is you might be paying for features you don't plan to use.
Yeah, but I mean, I think just having good location information is, in the end, going to be something useful, and I don't disagree with them for sort of pushing this on folks in the interest of simplicity. Yeah.
One other thing I want
good. Yeah.
Yeah, and one other thing I want to note is I think Extreme has done this already. This sort of like multiple personas or profiles for the same hardware, because Extreme has multiple wireless companies under its banner, essentially Zebra, Aerohive, and others. So they can say, "Oh, do you want sort of the Zebra flavor? Okay, that's fine. It's the same AP, the same management." So Cisco also taking a page from Extreme on this, I think.
Yeah, I think they're definitely following Extreme's lead. Well, moving on, Aviatrix is now edging into network platform as a service. They have, up till now, offered a DIY approach to creating a uniform cloud networking environment with tools that customers either downloaded, installed, and then managed in their own IaaS environments in order to bring to each a custom set of interfaces. Now, Aviatrix is offering its initial as-a-service networking platform, which is fully managed by Aviatrix, which customers connect to from their IaaS environments. This is in preview in December and will be generally available in January, and will be initially focused on cloud perimeter security use cases, with additional use cases coming along later. What are your thoughts on this, Drew?
I think it makes sense. If you're not familiar with Aviatrix, they essentially, build themselves as sort of a common operating and management layer for public cloud networking. You deploy Aviatrix software, in a VPC or a VNet or whatever, and then that software, which they call a network gateway, they use the native constructs of the public cloud to set up and manage, your routing, your VPNs, ingress and egress controls, and so on. And you do all that from a single console. So your networking looks the same, whether you're trying to do it in AWS or Azure or Google or even connect all those. That was the benefit. But now what they're saying is, yeah, like you mentioned, you had to set all that up itself. You had to, make sure you were picking the right infrastructure, you were assigning the right memory and CPU and so on. You were doing all the software upgrades. With this PaaS approach, Aviatrix will now do that for you. So essentially it's taking advantage of the cloud for this cloud networking capability that they've had. Makes total sense.
Yeah, and I mean, if you kind of look at this space, you can watch folks like Alkira and Aviatrix battle it out in terms of user experience and ease of use and all that fun stuff. But net, I think the whole network as a service movement has started to come of age with these recent announcements this fall.
Just two things to note, though. First, this PaaS capability will only apply to new customers. So if you're an existing Aviatrix customer, you may have to wait to get this PaaS capability, and there may be a services engagement with Aviatrix to make that transition. And second, it only does apply to its cloud egress firewall capabilities, not to its network gateway software. Aviatrix told me that they would be rolling out other capabilities in 2025, but right now they're just getting the ball rolling with their cloud egress capability.
And for existing customers that want to move to PaaS, they have to engage with the Aviatrix professional services, right, Drew?
That's what they said, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so it's for me, it's like Aviatrix is making a baby step here. They're testing the water, seeing how it works, and I think there also probably has to be some significant work for them under the hood to develop that PaaS capability. So again, a limited rollout as they get their feet wet with providing this capability or this service.
Yeah, that makes sense. The only thing is I don't actually agree with the idea of making it available to non-customers first, because that's giving them treating the non-customers better than you're treating customers, which I would question, but hey.
You mean the existing customers versus the new customers? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, you got to start somewhere, I guess.
Exactly. So.
Moving on, but sticking with cloud, Versa Networks, they provide Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE. They've announced Versa 1, which they say provides SASE for the WAN, the cloud, the data center, and campus. I got a briefing from Versa, and this announcement is kind of mostly about positioning versus competing as a converged networking and security platform, a one-stop shop for your network and security needs. One thing I learned from the briefing is that Versa has a line of campus and LAN switches. I didn't know that. They are fully intending to compete against traditional LAN vendors in this space. So bringing that SASE capability right down into your campus, as opposed to it just being sort of from your SD-WAN or your SSE into the cloud. And I'm calling this out here, and we put this in the show because I think I'm seeing a trend of vendors moving into this converged network and security platform where they want to essentially be the one-stop shop for you and cover most of the networks you care about, your campus and LAN, your branch office, your WAN, and your public cloud. So versus putting its stake down here in this converged area, you'll hear it from other folks like Fortinet, Palo Alto Networks, and others looking to be your everything.
Yeah, it's really in a vendor agnostic, from a vendor agnostic perspective, you're looking at the convergence of SASE, which is really still an architecture, SD-WAN, and Zero Trust Network Access, which are all sort of coming together in one big common thing. And you're seeing this, what's interesting is you're seeing this from people who sell on-prem gear or who started life selling on-prem gear, people who mostly are selling cloud services. It's sort of across the board. So one of the things we're tracking very closely is to see at what point network and security teams are going to begin to converge in enterprises. Right now, based on our research, that hasn't happened yet.
Right.
But we expect to see that starting to happen. I'm not sure how much of a trend it's going to be, simply because there is still deep subject matter expertise in networking that's not necessarily security pertinent, and vice versa.
Right.
So I'm going to keep an eye on that, supposed convergence of the operations teams. And certainly, if you're listening and you want to give us a shout and tell us what's going on in your environment, we'd love to hear that in the follow-up.
Yeah, so the big pitch here obviously is, beyond one vendor wanting to sell you as much stuff as possible, the benefit to you is supposed to be a common operating model, a common interface to manage your network configs and your security policies, and one OS that runs on all the hardware that the company is going to sell you. So be it a firewall, a switch, an SD-WAN gateway, et cetera, instead of you having to manage a bunch of different operating systems and devices and kind of do all that stitching together that engineers tend to have to do. The premise is that one OS, one interface will streamline your operations and make things easier. But John, it sounds like, as you're looking at talking to companies about whether this is going to happen, I don't know.
The problem is, for all this to actually work out as planned, you'd have to have a SOC-NOC convergence, and that is just flat out not happening. We've been asking that question for years. Are you operating separate NOCs and SOCs? And the answer is yes, and they plan to do so for the foreseeable future. More importantly, we haven't seen yet any meaningful correlation between converging your SOC and NOC and improving your security stance, although you can improve your network performance somewhat. So it's not entirely clear that the you in the sentence that you just read there, Drew, that there's a common operating interface for you. My problem is, who is that you? Because right now that you is two different people in two different places, and it's not entirely clear that there's an advantage to them both working on the same interface. That said, it could change. And so that's why I'm sort of reaching out and saying, hey, if anybody has thoughts on this and wants to talk about the pros and cons of converging NOC and SOC, or at least converging the tools and the management interface, definitely would want to hear from you.
Yeah, packetpushers.net/FU.
All right. Well, moving right along, Palo Alto has warned users of potential for unauthenticated remote core access execution in its management interface. Now, just to be clear, let's lead with carefully reassuring customers that there are no known exploits in the wild, while also admitting itself that it does not yet know all the details of the flaw. Palo Alto said customers should take steps to reduce the risk associated with possible remote code execution vulnerability in Panorama, which is its management interface. The company's main recommendations are restrict access to the management interface to trusted internal networks and/or trusted IP addresses. Always good practice anyway. Palo Alto users not up to date on patching probably want to get up to date on patching. So basically, Palo Alto and the CISA are urging everyone to get patched because there are ongoing attacks exploiting other vulnerabilities. Bottom line, restricted access, updated patches, and watch this space. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the bulletin from Palo Alto Networks. They're rating this themselves a severity of 9.3 out of 10. So that is of the highest urgency. So while it may be somewhat reassuring that they aren't seeing attacks in the wild yet, it does sound like this is serious. And if you're on Panorama, you need to go attend to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only thing that gives me a little confidence in this, and I don't want to go too easy on Palo Alto, is the fact that essentially you can limit your risk by following basic security hygiene practices. So that's a good thing, at least.
Right, for sure. Yeah. All right, and we have those links in the show notes if you want to go check it out. Moving on, Google Cloud has announced it's going to require multi-factor authentication for all Google Cloud users. The company is taking a 3-phase approach to the transition. Phase 1, which is starting now, Google is essentially going to ask nicely, will you please implement MFA? It's going to give you some hints on how to do that. Starting in early 2025, in Phase 2, Google will require MFA for users that log in with a password. Google writes, quote, you'll see notifications and guidance across the Google Cloud Console, Firebase Console, G Cloud, and other platforms. To continue using these tools, you'll need to enroll in MFA. So plan on that being an absolute requirement starting in early 2025 if you want to use those things. That's the end of the asking nicely phase. And Phase 3, by the end of 2025, MFA requirements will extend to users who federate authentication into Google Cloud. Google says it's working with identity providers to ensure the standards are in place for a smooth handoff.
And the reason for this is, as Google says, it's taking this step because phishing attacks and stolen credentials are a top attack vector. No surprise there. So, yeah, this seems like a limited but perfectly reasonable stance for Google to be taking, I guess.
Yes, and I like that they're doing the ask nicely phase first, but there will be a hard requirement pretty soon because the calendar is waning and time is running out.
Yes, and I think you had an observation when we looked at all our security-related items for today. Like, what the heck? Are we still talking about some of the basics here after all these years and all these new capabilities like Zero Trust? We're still talking about, hey, don't forget to patch. Hey, restrict your access. Hey, use MFA. Like, we could have been having this conversation in 2014, and
Easily.
instead we're having it in 2024. Oh,
and
well.
We'll probably be having it in 2034, so... which
God
keeps us in
forbid.
business, right?
I guess so.
So, Jana, we've been, keeping an eye on sort of the developments in the nuclear space because of the insane demand for power now in data centers. I found a story about a nuclear power startup, OKO. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. They say they have a letter of intent from 2 unnamed data center providers for OKO to provide up to 750 megawatts of power at data center sites in the United States. OKO aims to build and operate small modular reactors, which are essentially mini nuclear power plants that can be built on site or near to locations such as data centers that require massive amounts of electricity. OKO says its powerhouses come in 15 and 50 megawatt units that can be deployed in phases, so you can sort of start small and then build out. The company also says it powers its plants with nuclear waste from existing reactors. This all sounds good, but there are still major federal regulatory hurdles to overcome and municipal laws and codes. And according to a story in the Register, OKO hasn't actually brought a single power plant online yet, though it hopes to by the end of the decade.
Yeah, and I think there's a handful of things to notice here. First and foremost, the ramped up energy requirements, largely driven by AI, but not exclusively, and will also be in place for quantum as we sort of roll on to that. That's going to be key. I think it's also interesting, too, that people are getting louder about the fact that the demand is going to be there. So Oklo is saying, hey, we've got letters from 2 unnamed customers or future customers. My jaw is still hanging open at Microsoft saying that it wants to reactivate 3 Mile Island, not because it's a bad idea, not because I'm disagreeing with them, but quite simply the negative branding that it's risking associating there tells you how dire the need for energy really has to be before you go and do that. And I think one of the cool things is with the U.S. administration change looking to happen. It's quite possible that this could all get accelerated very quickly. Traditionally, Republicans tend to be anti-regulation and somewhat more pro-nuclear power than Democrats, although, I'm not sure it really goes by party. But
Right.
there's that. And then there's also a whole bunch of Silicon Valley folks who have deep interests in power-hungry technologies like AI and crypto, and they are getting very visible and prominent places in the incoming administration. So here we are. But I don't know. Drew, what do you think?
Yeah, I love the idea of being able to take, nuclear waste and reusing it. And if Oklo has actually figured out how to do that, that's very cool. But there's also a reason the regulations are in place around nuclear power. This is not the place where you move fast and break things. So, on one hand, yes, innovation can be stymied by regulation. On the other hand, there are often good reasons why you need that regulation. And Silicon Valley and I feel like the incoming administration both tend to be very cavalier. I guess
Well, I hear you, and I'm sort of torn because, on the one hand, one of the things I immediately thought of was, gosh, modular nuclear power units could be really useful for small communities, for example. And then I realized I can say things like that because I actually live right down the street from a nuclear power plant. So basically, it's not really upping my risk much.
Right.
It's just a new, different flavor. And
Yes.
but then.
I'm imagining, my neighborhood where, getting a new apartment complex built requires years of fighting, dropping a small modular reactor, and no, it's never going to happen here.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess loosening the regulations is maybe a little bit of a good thing, but there, as you said, there is such a thing as going a little too far. So we'll watch and wait, but it's definitely an area that's interesting and worth keeping an eye on.
Interesting times, as the curse goes.
Yes.
All right, let's wrap up the news with Cisco reporting their Q1 2025 earnings. For the quarter, revenues were $13.8 billion, down 6% year over year, and CNBC notes that this is Cisco's 4th straight quarter of revenue decline. Net income was $2.7 billion, down 25% compared to this time last year. By business unit, networking revenue, which accounts for the bulk of Cisco's revenue, was down 23%. Collaboration was down 3%. There were some bright spots. Their security revenue doubled versus this time last year for a total of just over $2 billion for the quarter. And observability revenue was up 36% to $258 million. Despite this decline, Cisco is predicting or forecasting a full year 2025 revenues of 55 to 56 billion, which would put it slightly above the revenues it did in 2024. So not a great start to the quarter, but Cisco thinks maybe it's got some things it can do in the future, particularly around AI. CEO Chuck Robbins is predicting $1 billion worth of orders of AI infrastructure gear in financial 2025. And he said customers have already ordered 300 million in AI infrastructure from Cisco for the first quarter.
Yeah, so that means that's only another 700 million to go. No, it really isn't that much in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting is when you note security revenue doubled this versus this time last year for a total of just over 2 billion for the quarter, meaning that's a run rate of 8 billion. As Ed Amoroso, who was the CISO for AT&T for a while, put it at one point, sometimes you can hide a highly successful security company inside a larger company that may not look as successful. If you peeled that out and had it at its own company, it would be a rock star success company.
That's true.
So I have to tip my hat to Cisco on this, and I've been very skeptical of them in the security space, but good on them for driving so much security revenue, and let's hope the quality continues to be there.
And with that CNBC note that this is Cisco's 4th straight quarter of revenue decline, I went and looked back at Cisco's full year revenues for the last 4 or 5 years. they've been some up and downs, but they're generally, somewhere in the ballpark of 55 billion a year. So Cisco seems to be sort of like, it's not a growth company anymore, but it's managing its finance as well as sort of a mature, traditional, or legacy vendor, as they say. So, I guess I'm not worried for Cisco's fortunes going forward.
Well, yeah, and I would also add that what has happened in the past, couple of years is COVID, and so we saw a lot of craziness where people, went nuts ordering stuff with supply chain issues, and then it took a while for the pig and the python to get digested. So a lot of infrastructure vendors are blaming COVID for recent slowdowns and looking optimistically towards better times ahead. So
AI is going to save everybody's bottom line, is the tea leaves that I'm reading.
yeah, that's exactly it.
All right, well, that wraps up the news portion of the show. Stick around for our Tech Bytes conversation. We're talking with Minio and about how they are altering the data infrastructure landscape for AI. That's coming right up. Today on the Tech Bytes podcast, we welcome back sponsor Minio to talk about how AI is altering the data infrastructure landscape. We're also going to dig into Minio's recently launched AI Store. This is a software-only distributed object store that offers simplicity, scalability, and performance for AI infrastructure and other high-performance storage use cases. Our guest is Tigley, CTO at Minio. Welcome to the podcast. And can you give us some quick background on Minio and how you're differentiating yourself in the object storage space?
Minio is a drop-in replacement for AWS S3 APIs as well as the full stack services. And the big difference for Minio is we can run anywhere else. So we always started the company to be the alternative to AWS S3 services outside AWS ecosystem, whether it's on the edge, on different clouds, different Kubernetes services. Minio could be running on everywhere else. Simplicity, high performance, and the best-in-class support are the key pillars of Minio for the last 10 years. We are open source company, and this has been the most important part of the reputation Minio has, and it's been quite popular with developers. And over the last 5 to 6 years, we've been getting into the IT as well as data use cases in the enterprise.
Now, we've been talking a lot on Packet Pushers about how artificial intelligence is affecting data networks. So we've talked about what a DC build looks like these days and speed requirements and concerns about buffering and packet loss and that kind of stuff. Now, Minio's got a storage perspective on this. So how is AI from Minio's perspective affecting data infrastructure? And I'm really curious to know if it's different from big data, which we've been talking about forever.
The way it worked in the past was the foundation of the AI wave, the AI trends, and the way of AI developers and AI applications are trying to handle data has always been built by the data lake houses, the data lake house architecture, or the modern data lakes, or different marketing names that different vendors has been giving to the architectures that's been built. But the big data was, or the Hadoop going back 20 years. Hadoop started this trying to organize the data in a way that the scale, performance, and security is going to be handled by these solutions. But none of them in the last 20 years has been quite successful trying to get them under one umbrella. AI expands this picture a little bit further because you have to have a checkpointing ML flow, kube flow type of an activity, some kind of a pipeline. You have to have vector databases. You have to have Hugging Face and a repository for all the models and data sets. So it expands this picture into various areas. And what we do is Minio is the foundation for all of these. Vector databases started at a later age, and they have to use object storage because they started with object storage. And to your specific questions, when you go look at the networking and the data challenges, it's all about the scale and performance. The data networks of Hadoop of 1 gigabit is not the networks that you use today. 100 gigabit is the networking that we use with AI infrastructure. All of our customers that are large-scale AI deployments and using for distributed training, they have to have 100 gigabit network data networks and then NVMe on the server side supporting it to feed their GPUs, because there's this problem in the industry called hungry GPU problem. And in order to feed those GPUs, you need the lowest latency, least amount of hops, and the simplistic networking with the highest bandwidth possible. We can talk about what we are going to do with our AI store product and the technologies that we are investing in. For example, S3 over RDMA is critical for the next 2-3 years, because when you go from 100 gigabit Ethernet, you're going to go to 400 and then 800. When you get to those levels, the number of packets that you have to process at the storage, at the CPU and networking layer tremendously increases. And that requires different protocols than TCP/IP. And we are looking at RDMA over Ethernet. Ethernet is the base, but RoCE or RDMA over Ethernet is what we are investing on, and we are having an S3 over RDMA. Essentially, we're going to be one of the few people who are focusing on this solely, and that's going to help tremendously for the AI infrastructure, AI use cases. And to answer your question, the data infrastructure will tremendously change when you go to those higher speeds. For the next 1 to 2 years, it's great, because 100 gigabit, when you combine it with 2 times 100 gigabit, will be totally fine even for the largest use cases. But at 2-year out, 3-year out, we see this changing.
So can you give us sort of what a sample architecture might look like for AI infrastructure built around a large data lake and using object storage?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's no different than predictive AI has been done for the last 15 years. We talked about big data, and Hadoop started that effort, moving things to big data. Everything that you know of with a modern data lake and a warehousing architecture, the 2 layers, which is query engine. The only big change was the query engines were getting separated, so disaggregation of storage and compute, if you will. So Trino, Dremio type of a query engine is natively S3 compatible, and they can easily use object storage. So you have different engines, query engines, requesting data from the modern data lakes, which is the raw data, which we have been replacing HDFS very successfully in the field. And people have been using, Hadoop has written S3A connectors, and it's been out there for many years. And Minio has been using S3A to replace the 3 copies of Hadoop and reducing the cost of it to about 1.2 to 1.4, depending on the erasure coding you're choosing. So it's a tremendous cost saving just to go from a HDFS piece replacement of that in a Hadoop ecosystem and inject object storage or Minio there. You are saving tremendous amount of money. And we have a few customers that has done this in a large scale, and they have been very successful in terms of the simplicity environment, how many people are running this environment, and how they simplify their infrastructure. So it would be just a modern object store like Minio, query engines, that would be the modern architecture. But when you go to the AI infrastructure, you expand this picture into 2-3 other sections on what I call about the ML flow, Kubeflow type of a pipeline, any type of a pipeline. Some people, like OpenShift, for example, has OpenShift AI, which is their open source components as the pipeline. And at the bottom, you need vector DBs. Most of the LLM work in the enterprise today is going with LLM plus RAG, and you have to have a vector database. Milvus, LensDB, if you look at their documentation, they all recommend Minio. They started using Minio when they were developing, and they recommend that to their customers. So you need that vector DB piece, because when you have the corpus data, the data corpus of what you're doing for LLM plus RAG type of an environment, you need to insert them to a vector DB and take them out for prompting and other activities. And then you need model and data sets, which is early days of GitHub and GitLab. For the enterprise, everything is on-prem. So you need a version of Hugging Face on-prem. And this is what we have done with AI Store, Minio's only commercial product. We have built a on-prem Hugging Face equivalent. Basically, on buckets that we have on Minio can be enabled with the Hugging Face API. So a developer can easily use, without a change of code, they can take the data sets and the models that they're using in a Hugging Face, but put them on-prem and use their on-prem copies. So the same fashion that we have replaced S3 APIs and services for on-prem, we are doing the same thing for AI infrastructure with Hugging Face data sets and data models. They can just take the same models, make it between their 4 walls, store them on a bucket on object storage from Minio, part of the AI Store product that we are launching for our customers and we're providing to our customers.
Yeah, I think this is probably a good time then to kind of drill in a little bit more on AI Store. What is it that you're building? Why might companies building out AI infrastructure want to take a look at it?
So the storage for AI represented specific challenges. We covered some of them. The scale is very important because the huge bandwidth and capacity needs because of the distributed training and modifying the models, training in distributed inference, distributed training, and then inference parts. They all, especially with the inference, you had to have the checkpoints that required more and more. So the scale was the problem. The other part was we covered with the data networking. The challenge was the performance, the high I/O bandwidth between the last stop or closer to the GPU. So there's no hungry GPU problem. We covered that part as well. That was the performance challenge. And then protecting the data security. Most of our customers, or nearly all of our customers, enterprise customers, they all wanted to control their data because of LLMs is commodity nowadays, but LLM plus RAG or injecting their proprietary information into the models or prompting with those models, they didn't feel comfortable putting something out there, meaning using cloud services or using other services that are available publicly. They wanted to do it themselves because that proprietary data is the really important piece when it comes to training the models, modifying the models, and increasing the accuracy, also making them relevant for their customers. So if you think about JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they all announce their AI chatbots that's internal to their customer, internal to their employees, where they can just check research papers or they can ask certain things about a financial product. And all of those were done using their own proprietary data. Same with Bloomberg. They have tremendous amount of data and they announce their AI initiatives. They all leveraging their own internal data. So security or protecting the data or controlling the data, this is not the security we are talking about. Cloud is not secure enough. We should have everything on-prem type of activity. See, when we talk about security challenge, they needed their data to be on-prem because when they inject this data to a LLM that is outside, they didn't want the leakage. They didn't want to share that data. All of that.
Right. They don't want their private data going out to a public model and suddenly be incorporated into somebody else's AI chat.
Exactly. It can be the training for somebody else's product, or it can be the data, the source data, or there can be many different ways to look at it. Because of those things, we have come to the conclusion that we always did really great with object storage, high performance distributed object storage, best in class simplicity. But then we have seen over the last 5 to 6 years, we have seen our enterprise customers asking us for caching, for example, that data for read caching. They ask for observability. We were publishing all of our data for Prometheus and Grafana to build dashboards, but our customers wanted to not install another product. They want or Elk or Splunk to do the observability for audit logs for other things. So we built our own observability, both for the internals of the disks and how the disks are doing, to audit logging, to error logging, everything. Load balancing, they wanted to control things. So we built all these feature sets on top of the core of the high performance distributed object stores we already have. And this is also aligned it together with some of these feature set that we just mentioned, whether it's prompt, which we haven't talked too much about it, but Hugging Face APIs and having the data sets and the data models being stored on the buckets. All of them put together is the AI store, and this is our commercial product. Minio will have AI store with all of these features built, available to the customers, and for specifically the use case of AI infrastructure.
So, I think a point to make here is this is not just a rebranding exercise so you can get on the AI train. You've actually done something with the product.
Absolutely not. This is not the new bottle, old wine. This is not rebranding. This is not marketing. I can go through, I think, 7, 8 different feature sets. And if you look at it in the legacy software world, they would be their own products if you were to go into those kind of details. So we built tremendous amount of this has been going on for the last 1.5 years of development cycle. So we built all of these feature sets and we packed them into one product. So going forward, the commercial life of Minio is very straightforward. It's single product. Focus is the AI infrastructure, and all of these things that we are talking about is going to be tremendously helpful for those folks who are doing on-prem, large-scale AI distributed training or any kind of AI infrastructure.
So one feature you hinted at that you felt like was unique to AI Store was something called prompt object. Can you just give us a little overview of that?
I believe that's the coolest piece that's in the whole stack. There are many other features. We built our own KMS, for example, for encryption. We always work with HashiCorp Vault, Gemalto, and others, and integrated into that. We even did some caching type of an activity called KES. But we built our own KMS part of this. We built our own catalog, which is like a GraphQL in memory database where we can take all the namespace in an object store and query those things. But relevant to the AI questions that you had, prompt object is basically an introduction of a new S3 API. We can do these things because we are the market leader when it comes to following the S3 product and S3 specs. And prompt object basically enables users, developers to do basically, we have unstructured objects or unstructured data. All the objects can be JPEG files, it can be CSV files, different type of files. But think about an image. You're just doing put of a receipt that is from a restaurant in California, and you're putting another receipt from a restaurant in New York, let's say. Two different restaurants, and all of the addresses and what's being charged and the receipts are there. These are two objects. You're putting them into the Minio object store, and with using prompt object, you can pass through an LLM, you can pass a basic prompt. You can say, what's the address on that receipt? That gets passed through this API. We can extract the address within that object. This is going one step further. This is going inside the object, basically, looking at that image, extracting the address, and the output would be the address of that restaurant in California.
So I can take an image file and get text out of it, essentially, is what you're saying. I don't need a text file to get an LLM.
You can not only text, the text part is the easy. You can get context out of it. You can mean that developers can exponentially expand these capabilities to do for MRI scans. They can do KYC for financial analysis. You can get context. You can not only get the text. The cool thing about this when we do the demos to our prospects and customers, you can compare these two images, the New York receipt and the California receipt, and then see what kind of restaurants were they. So you can easily say, what's the difference between the two objects or two receipts? And you will get, oh, this one is a Mexican restaurant. The receipt has tacos. And the other one is a vegetarian restaurant in New York and XYZ. And you can get this context. That's powerful. And having this type of we were always doing put an object into an object store and get by an application. With this, we can do a put, but do a prompt. Prompt meaning get the context out of that object, understand the what's inside that object, basically. In this simple example, it was two receipts, but it can be an MRI scan. It can be a KYC application and an image of a person or an ID. Or you can have an image of a person and see how many of is this image in any of these videos? You can do tremendous amount of things, and it's one line code, and it's just natural language processing, basically. You are just asking the question just like you would ask to anybody.
I feel like we scratched just the surface on AI Store and what it can do. But if folks want to dig around and get more details, find out more information, or even reach out to Minio to get more details, where should they go?
Best place would be min.io. We have all the blogs, all the resources and materials that all the things that we are talking about here is available there. You can reach to us, and then we can jump on a call with you, with anybody who's interested to go into the details, technical details of all these things we talked about.
Fantastic. That was min.io, and it's right there in the name, min.io. Thanks, Sarah, for
Exactly.
being here. And thanks to min.io for being a sponsor. And thanks to you for listening. You can find this and many more fine, free technical podcasts along with our community blog. It's all at packetpushers.net. You can follow us on LinkedIn, hear us on Spotify, and rate us on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, remember that too much infrastructure would never be enough.